friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Sunny Studios Snail Mail and Harvest Mice. So I've stamped out the images I'll be using on some Neenah Solar White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. The first image that I'm going to tackle is that mailbox, and I'm using C3, C5, and C7. I wanted it to be a black mailbox, so I started with that C7 and laid in some shadow on both the top and bottom edge. And then I'm also going to do some coloring on the metal on the inside of the lid. And then I'm going to grab my C5 and start to blend up and towards the center. I want there to be a nice highlight where that metal would be rounded and the sun would hit it. And then I also finished coloring the little metal lip of the door, and I'm going to color the inside of the mailbox as well, just working carefully around that letter and bringing that color down on the lid as well. I want to leave a nice highlight there because the sun would hit that too. And then I'm going to finish with the C3. And I realized at this point that it really wasn't looking like a black mailbox like I wanted. So I knew that for my second layer I was going to have to add in the C9. And that is going to darken things up quite a bit. So I'm going to go right over my previous coloring with that C9, and I'm darkening up those shadows. And this is much more of a black tone, so I'm much happier with it. So I'm just laying that color in on the inside of the mailbox and on the inside of the lid, and then I'm going to blend that out with the C7, again bringing it towards the middle of the mailbox where that highlight would be, bringing it up behind that letter and down on the lid. And then I'm going to come in with the C5 and carry that color even further, just making sure to color over the edge of that C7 so I get a nice transition from shade to shade. And then finally I'm going to use that C3. So I actually have 4 different shades on that mailbox, but I think that really does help me create that look of the really black metallic look with that highlight. For that wooden stake that the mailbox is standing on, I'm going to use E23, E25, and E27. I put some of that E27 as a shadow right up under the mailbox and also where the grass would be casting a shadow. And then I'm blending toward the center with the E25. And then I'll finish with the E23. And then I am going to do a second layer on that as well because I just like the way that it increases that saturation and adds a bit more depth. So I'm coming back in with that E27 and adding a bit more darkness and then blending out with the E25. And I left off the E23 on the second round. So now I'm moving over to my little mouse, and I'm going to use C0, C1, C3, and C5 for him. Right now I'm starting with the C1 and just adding a bit of shading all over. I like to do this first because I just think it's easier to have that shading laid in, and then I can add whatever little details I want over top. So I'm blending that out with the C0 now and letting that fade into the white. Then I'll bring in the C5 and start to give him some uniqueness and personality. So I'm going to color one of his ears to be this dark gray. I'm also going to add like a dark patch down his back and then a little spot on his arm there. I like to just play with my Copics when it comes to critters like this with mice and bunnies, and you know, just kind of go wherever the markers lead me. I don't really have a plan in place ahead of time, but it's more just like when you're a little kid with crayons and you're just laying there on the floor with your Crayolas spread around you and, you know, going to town. And that's kind of like what this feels like to me. It's just pure joy in coloring. So I just blended all the way down in the reverse with the C3, then the C1, and then added a little C0 on his belly. The next combo that I'm using is R11, R20, and R22. And I'm going to color in the little heart on the letter that's in the mailbox. I'm also going to color the mouse's nose and ear and tail. So I blended out with the R20 on all of those, and I also did his little feet with the R20, and then I'll use the R11 as my lightest. I didn't bother on the nose or the heart because they were too small, but I did add it to the ear and his tail and feet, and then I gave him a rosy cheek with that as well. Next, I'm using B00, B01, and B02, and I'm going to color the letter in the mailbox. So I'm just outlining the edges of the folds of the envelope with that B02, and then I'll go over the edge of that with the B01, and then blend out all the rest with the B00. And that will be a nice pale blue, which is probably my most frequently used color of envelope. I always send my cards out in colored envelopes because I just think it's so nice to open your mailbox and get that splash of color amongst all your bills and junk mail. So I definitely love doing that. So now I've moved on to the flag on my mailbox, and I used R24, R29, and R39 for that. And I'm also going to use those shades to color in the second letter. So I'm using that R39 again to outline the edges and folds of that envelope. And then I'll blend that out with the R29. And I'm going to fill in all the rest of the white space with the R24. So this could actually be a Valentine card if you wanted it to be. It really could be just anything, but you know, depending on how you color the envelopes, especially because they have those little heart seals, this could definitely be a Valentine card. So I'm going to move on to the shell of my snail, and for that I'm using BG02, BG05, and BG09. I started with the BG09 to do the swirl and just really make that prominent, and then I'm blending that out with the BG05. And then I'll bring in the BG02 to be my lightest shade and create that highlight. And I'll also use these shades to color in the heart seal on the red envelope. For the snail's body, I'm going to use Y21 and Y26. So I use the Y26 first to lay in a little shadow and blend it out with the Y21. And then I went back with the Y26 to darken things up a bit. And there still wasn't quite enough contrast, so I did pull in the YR23 as well. And then for the little grasses down at the bottom of the mailbox, I'm going to use G24 and G29. I used the G29 to add a little shading on the left side, and then blended toward the right with the G24. Once I finish that coloring, I will grab my black Sakura Jelly Roll marker and go over the eyes of the mouse and the snail, just really carefully to bring those back to life, and then I'll trim these images out with their coordinating dies. I'm going to be using one sheet of pattern paper from the Sunny Studios Summer Splash pattern paper pack, and it's this one here with the cloud print. I thought that would be cool to use. I'm going to die cut that with the stitched arch, but I'm actually going to turn that die on its side just for something different. And then I used two of the Slimline Nature borders to cut down some Lawn Fawn, cilantro, and Noble Fir cardstocks, and I'm going to glue that down to the bottom of the stitched arch to create a little grassy section. So I added the cilantro panel first, so that's kind of like a rolling hill in the distance a little bit. And then I've got the more detailed grass border with the Noble Fir cardstock down in front. So I just glued that right over top, and then I'm going to take the Frilly Frames Quatrefoil die, and I'm actually going to trim this down to be slightly smaller so that it fits on my card front, but still has that stitching detail all the way around. So once I ran that through my die cutting machine, you can see that it just will remove this panel. Because there was that thick cardstock on there, I just had to use my scissors to remove that completely, but it just looks more complete than if I would have, cut it down with my paper trimmer. So I'm going to add my sentiment. I popped my panel in my MISTI, and I'm stamping with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. It's the same ink that I used for my images. And the sentiment says, "You make my heart smile." And that is from the Snail Mail mini stamp set from Sunny Studio. Stamp that down a few times to get a really good impression. And then I'm going to pop a piece of narwhal cardstock from Lawn Fawn in my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp in Hippo ink. And yes, that card base is closed because I do want to stamp on the outside. So I picked the single letter and the 3 little hearts that are in the Snail Mail stamp set and stamped that over the entire front of my card. And now I'm going to open that up so I can stamp on the inside as well. I'm going to stamp another little mouse from the Harvest Mice stamp set. And thank you, that was so kind. That's also from that stamp set. The trio of hearts is from Snail Mail. So now I'm ready to start my assembly. I'm going to take my focal panel, add some liquid glue to the back of that, and I'm going to add that over on the left-hand side of the card, right in the center there. So that is going to just add a nice, really pretty pop of color in the center and really pull your eye in. And then I'll grab my mailbox because that is the largest image, and I'm going to tuck that between those 2 grassy borders over on the left-hand side. Just make sure that that is nice and straight on there. And then I'll grab my next largest image, which is the mouse, and get him situated right where I want him. He's going to be sitting on the darker grassy border. And I'll add the little red envelope in his hands. So I love how I was able to take a fall themed stamp set, that Harvest Mouse, and create, you know, an everyday or a Valentine card just by whatever you place in his hands. I think that's really cool how these images are drawn that way. So I have added the little snail as well, and I wanted to shift things over just slightly, which is why I love using that liquid glue, because you have that little bit of time before it dries permanently to be able to adjust things. And I didn't show these, but because I had those trio of hearts on the background and the inside, I thought that it would be fun to add them to the focal panel as well. So off screen, I just stamped those 3 little hearts again, colored them in with the same shades that I had been using, and I decided to kind of fill in the space around my sentiment with those. And I really love how they added those little pops of color to the top of the scene there. So as a final embellishment, I'm going to add a bit of stardust stickles, just a few little places, just the 3 little hearts and then the 2 heart seals on the envelopes, just so there's a bit of sparkle, something a little extra to catch the light when you tip it, which you can see right there. And I'll give you another peek at the inside of my card as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. This is my final video of 2020. So if you'd like to show your support, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I have a few changes coming to my channel in the new year, but we'll get into that later. So make sure that you're notified for any updates. If you're interested in any of the products that I used today, you'll find those listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. I want to thank you guys all so much for your support this year. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.